while we're in the lobby, maybe we can have a chat with Lex. Because we don't necessarily technically need to be in the game. Have a chat. Hello there, Lex. Firstly, how are you doing? Hope you're doing well, and let us know who you are and what you do with Anbennar.
Hi there. So I'm doing two things with Anbennar right now. One is that I'm playing Cug to Here, and I'm in constant wars where everything is always on fire. And
Yes,
it's great.
can tell.
Yeah, it's been when we got to go into those caverns and fully stack wipe that, I think like 100k troops despite every advantage against us. That was great. But
It's a good
the reason why I'm
feeling.
being it was beautiful. But obviously the reason why you're bringing me in here is not to talk about how great Cug to Here is.
True.
Yeah, even though they are. I want to clarify
Mm-hmm.
that. Ezra Bank, let's go.
For sure.
But the main thing that I'm doing with Anbennar right now is that I'm one of the core people for the Victoria 3 mod. It's been in development for a while. We're really making some progress lately, and I'm excited to be talking about it.
Yeah, I've heard from the people who I've spoke to. I was talking to Wagensu, and I was talking to Riverdoge, saying about, you wanted to come and interview and all that. And the thing I was told more than anything was that you are like very excited, let's say, about the Anbennar Victoria 3 mod, and I think it's not really going to be a surprise. I don't really like the game, but I really like Anbennar. So, first of all, sell me on why I should play Vicky 3 Anbennar.
So let me give you a few different pitches, and hopefully at least one of them hits.
Okay.
Which is, first of all, you like Anbennar, right?
I do. In fact, like that is actually a
crazy idea.
Yeah,
I know.
Yeah.
But you've seen all these different countries. We've all looked at 1444 and thought about what actually happens. Like, we've seen all this gameplay, we've seen all of these ideas, we've seen these mission trees, but like basically everyone who engages with this mod loves to wonder who wins.
Right.
What ends up happening, who colonizes where, what dwarves win in the mountains, how big does Jad's empire get, all of that kind of stuff.
Well, I'm quite sad about Jad actually winning on that front, actually, because I definitely simp for Bursartensias. It's just the way of things, I kind of wish they win.
Look, Jad wins, but they get a lot of problems. So many problems. But really, one of the biggest things that pulls people into the Victoria 3 mod is that it's the future.
Right.
We are seeing the beginning of, in EU4, we see the early modern period and how it starts. Everything is set up for all of these nations to go through colonialism, imperialism, nationalism, to invent, modern finance and industry and artificery and all of these things. And by the Victoria 3 time, you're getting to see what actually happened. And this is still, partially in process. We're not fully finished with the map, but just being able to load that up and see how the team has gone through every single location, every single country, and has really explored who wins, why, what it means, it's awesome.
Okay. I mean, I have seen some of the maps, and while I do like seeing how the future has progressed in the Anbennar world, one thing that I don't know if it's changed at this point, but one thing I was not a super fan of was the way that the Dwarva looked in the Victoria 3 maps, because I couldn't really... There was no, like, differentiation between it being, a mountain and, like, outside the mountain. It was just all coloured in, and it looked very difficult to pass, let's say. Is that something that has been worked on at all, like, to make it a little bit... Or do you understand where I'm coming from with that?
Yeah, I do.
Is that something that's still a thing?
There have been some experiments with it. It's generally a low priority thing right now because the big draw is the systems that I'll be talking about in a second. But yeah, sometimes there's a little bit of a hard time seeing it. When you zoom in on the Victoria 3 map, which I do love doing, its terrain is very pretty. You get to see the massive peaks and all of that. And there are ways we think to experiment with the paper map version of like, adding in some texture here and there and all of that. But that is all preliminary right now. I
Okay.
think it is possible, but it is not currently a focus.
Okay. Um,
But, oh, go
so
ahead.
yeah, so I've got the map open for me as well now. So what is what has happened? Like what is the Vivin Empire? I've heard of the Northern League, of course. Jadanzar, not gonna lie, I quite like that name.
It's good.
Over
And they got a second Jad too.
there's a second Jad.
Yeah, do you see the little guy to the east, the Nabana Jad?
Uh, Whereabouts am we
Oh,
looking?
here. I realized I was paused on your screen. Go to Jad, go east a little.
Oh, Nahana Jad there, of course.
Yeah.
So Raj
In the
loses.
game,
Nice.
yes, absolutely. In the game, how the Jad has that big disaster about how it gets cut into. They take so much land. There's two different rival Jad empires forming, and you have to go back and forth between them.
Right, yes.
This happens.
Okay.
And it's a very cool little thing, from what I understand, and I'm no master on it. They end up independent for a long time, but as the rending happens, the East Jad, the Nahana Jad, ends up being so devastated by it that they have to rely on the West, and they enter into a personal union. This has ended up being, in my opinion, a really interesting dynamic that we're starting to explore, where Jadanzar, I'm not actually sure how to say it, has less population, less everything than East Jad. It's more spread out. It's, wide and expansive and hard to control.
Lots
Meanwhile,
of
the East
deserts.
Jad, exactly. East Jad is supposed to be, this junior partner, but they've got more money and more people and more everything.
Okay.
And so there's going to be such a tension. We're also exploring, with Harpyland and Overclan, those might end up as tributaries or vassals of the Jad. We're going to figure out what's going on. But playing as the West Jad is going to be a lot of gameplay of you are desperately trying to hold an empire together that in many ways you are not equipped to deal with.
Okay. A bit like potentially Britain being a little bit, weak, low population versus their, East India Company, Raj holding, which is got a lot more people in it. Sort of similar to that, I guess.
Sort of. So many of the advantages that Britain had. There is no grand industrialization in Jadanzar. There is no, birthplace of capitalism. In many ways, they're in a much worse position. But we're exploring how to make it balanced, how to make it still engaging to play. We don't want them to be doomed to fail, but we just, especially with the new DLC coming out, which is very focused on diplomacy and subjects and international commerce and investment, we're experimenting with a lot of ways to make this really dynamic.
Okay. So, other things that I notice are gnomes stay winning. I do enjoy seeing the gnomes staying winning.
They do stay winning.
Big fan of that.
I can tell you more
Grombar
about them
is
too, because they're
huge.
going to have so many problems.
Oh, do tell me about the problems for gnomes. Actually, that seems pretty interesting.
So, first of all, the gnomish hierarchy. They've got a lot of kobolds, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. They're, constantly in this back and forth, and the exact lore is still being determined. We're trying to figure out this level of how much the kobolds are subjugated, basically. But we're trying to experiment with how the hierarchy manages to keep to the thought, because they're trying to be a technocratic regime. They're trying to say that they care about merit and science and ideas and rationalism, but they're having to balance this with their geopolitical interests of racist gnomes and internal oppression, and that they have to rely on this internal subjugation to really get anything done at all. They've sent so many kobolds out to the colonies. If you look there, they've done imperialism in Hellas. They are a low population, highly unstable, advanced regime that is always petering back and forth between failing.
Right.
And this isn't even to mention what's going on with them and the Mechanim, which I'm not even sure if I can get into publicly yet.
So it's funny. I did do an interview. I think it was with Hoya, who maybe mentioned a bit more of the mechanism than maybe he was potentially allowed to. But it was a very fun interview to listen to anyway. Apparently, this one is a very out of date map, the one that I'm looking at. Uh,
Oh, is it?
yeah, I mean, I did just look in the
Oh, I see.
pinned comments. Maybe if you want to send me a newer
Actually,
one,
yes.
if you have one.
If you don't mind, if you go to the Anbennar server, we just had our first ever Victoria 3 teaser. And you
Oh,
could stream that if you want, but it has an updated map.
where can I find that?
So this would be in the Victoria 3 server at the very top next to Anbennar EU4 teasers.
Uh,
Below dev diaries, below announcements.
I see it. I see it. I see it. Okay, I'll pop this on screen then. So, okay, it is a much bigger map. Okay, so let's see. What has changed between this one and the one that I was using?
So I'll be honest, I'm not entirely sure. I believe there's been a lot of just fixing up states here and there, a little changes in Hales, I believe. There's a little more in Sar Hall, though it's very placeholder.
Okay. I noticed as well that it seems to some lore changed with the gnomes because the Dragon Hills kind of became a little bit more filled in and less of a wasteland. That's
Oh yeah, that
nice.
wasn't even a lore change. It was just we hadn't created the terrain or population for Kobold Zan yet.
Gotcha.
Oh, and that's another really interesting thing about the gnomes, which is that they don't take everything. The kobolds are able to basically go into the caverns and, trap it up, keep defensively there. But there's this constant cultural and political interplay where the gnomes want to be expanding into the caverns, but also realize that if they take that many kobold people, it'll be harder and harder for them to maintain control over the population. It's almost like Kobold Zan is required to exist for the gnomish hierarchy to really prosper.
Okay. And so let's talk a little bit about then Alen Tier, because obviously Alen Tier at the start of Anbennar in EU4, there is no Canorians there, but colonization is a thing that happens. So
Mhm.
who's the big winners? Who's the big losers? What's going on in Alen
So
Tier?
here's a real hot take that I have is that one of the most interesting things about Anbenar is that the quote unquote, Europeans, the Canorians, are so much less successful than they are in real life.
Hmm.
Because you can look at these Alen Tier maps and you're like, okay, there's a good amount of Laurent. There's like this Trolls Bay union of Alen Tier adventurers. There's Neurotica. There's the Triarchy, who I love. And there are these other various Canorian adventurers and things like that. One moment, I'm dealing with rebels. um, but when you scroll around and you see all of this, you see Ruinborn really just prospering. You see that, in Jordan, there is gnomish imperialism there, and the gnomes have done terrifyingly well. But you also see that these ruin-born states are still there. In the Kionai, they have almost fully unified. In Haraf, there are still so many independent ruin-born states. In the Taichend, there's a ton of them, and there's almost no Canorians that have managed to get through.
Okay.
And what
Yeah,
this really
Chaos still
means.
owning their entire island is surprising to me because that seems like a prime bit of colonization land. Anytime I'm playing a colonizer.
Absolutely. But the problem that the Canorians have is that this is a world with far less technological inequality, I guess I would say. The
Okay.
Ruinborn have strong states, both societally and technologically. The Canorians are going to be on the cutting edge of artificery, which I'm going to get into soon, and I am so excited about. But the Canorians, especially because they're less of naval powers, they're not as geopolitically advantaged as a lot of the in real life Europeans were, they're not able to just fully control the world. There is no world police. There is not going to be a Great Britain in Victoria 3 that every time you do a diplomatic play is always going to be stopping you. There is no country that is strong enough to do that. And that is what I'm excited for. That this world, that this mod is going to be as diplomatically dynamic as the EU4 mod is.
Okay. Yeah, that is something about Victoria games 2 and 3, I guess. That was quite a bit different from EU4. There is the global hegemon that is really so far above everyone else in quite a lot of ways. But if that's not existing, I suppose that is a certainly a different take on the period.
It
So
is. In Oh, go ahead.
no, go for it. If you've got something to say, feel
It's
free.
interesting. With Laurent, they're the closest thing to the British hegemon, but the funny thing about them is that they are still very backwards. Laurent has been able to like have a sort of East India Company equivalent in that they've taken a lot of Rahen, which is much like India, but they've done it almost purely due to the bad luck of their enemies, if I'm being honest. And I'm getting a little into personal opinion here, but the Laurent's companies and Rahen were only able to be established because of the rending. When the rending
Right.
happened, everything went wrong. Some Canorians, you see a little bit of Gnomish hierarchy, a little bit of Triarchy, a little bit of Laurent, all being able to take these little pieces, but all of them are unstable. The rending is over now. Rahen and Hles generally have been able to stabilize, and that's going to cause so many problems. Laurent doesn't have some grand colonial empire. There is, it has no real United States of America equivalent or 13 colonies, I guess. Its Canada equivalent is very small. It doesn't control vast swaths of almost anywhere besides maybe North Alen Tier. Every single place, in addition to this, like territorial non-integrity, their laws are pretty backwards. They're sort of like if the French Revolution never happened. Obviously, the French Revolution equivalent is an Anbennar with the Black Powder Rebellion, which we're
Right.
slowly developing alongside Jay. But the big colonial power is suffering under themselves. They're much closer to Spain in the early 1800s than like British Empire.
Okay. So, you mentioned there the Black Powder Rebellion, for people who don't know, because clearly I know all about it. But explain what the Black Powder Rebellion is, and yeah, I know if it's still in development, but what are the
Of
basic
course.
concepts and such that we're dealing with right now?
The Black Powder Revolution or Rebellion, excuse me, is how this entire setting got started. And it's what really draws me to it. And actually, this is the perfect segue into what I want to talk about next, which is that basically in Anbennar, and especially in Canor, in the years since the EU4 time period, mages have only been able to ensconce themselves even further into power. They've become the aristocrats, the nobles, the everything else. Server lost. That's not good. But I'll continue. The mages have been able to consolidate power, to take control, and it makes so much sense that they were able to do this. Because in the real world, we had these noble aristocrats centralizing and taking power when they couldn't throw a fireball. But when you have all these armies going about that are able to conquer and take control of these lands, of course the mages are going to end up with aristocrats so often. And so they dominate Canor and so many other places, and especially the Empire of Anbennar. But
Okay.
as artificery comes around, the using of magic to create enchanted items that multiple people can use, not just individually powerful mages, you have an entire change in the dynamic. It's like our own industrial revolution in a way, but even more powerful. Because this is not just the fact of okay, sometimes people have steam power now. Sometimes people are able to get rich without magic. It's like, no, we can change the entire world and put those tools that can do it into anyone's hands. The
Power
Black
to the
Powder Rebellion.
people,
Oh, sorry.
basically.
And
Power to
that's
the
the
people.
question.
Hmm.
And so the Black Powder Rebellion is something that happens in the centralized empire of Anbennar, which is very similar to the French Revolution in real life. But instead of it just being a simple, oh, it's bourgeoisie versus the aristocracy, it is that, but also is about artificers versus mages. Because you have this new nascent class of industrialists and inventors and engineers who are trying to, really gain power, to change the world, to take things away from the witch kings who have ruled everything for so long with their bloodlines and half-elven lineages and everything else. And the powers they have to do it include bullets that can stop magic, include laser beams that can shoot beams of Damestier magic, a mile away, include massive pieces of artillery, of mind control devices, of all of these other things. The power level of everyone in Halan becomes so much more because you already have these mages that can do things that obviously no one in the real world can do. But then you take those magics and you industrialize them. You get standardization, mass production, more innovations with the scientific method of magic. You're able to do so much more. And that's what we're exploring.
Okay. All right. So that is definitely intriguing. It's definitely like lore wise. I definitely never had any issues with Anbennar. I love the lore that has been made for Anbennar. Um, why does this fit Victoria 3 specifically instead of, let's say, let's do a second start date for EU4?
Because Victoria 3 is about the Industrial Revolution. 1836 to 1936 is the era in which everything changes, right? You go from a world of basically peasants and aristocrats into bourgeoisie and proletariat. You go from, no one's really able to produce more food than they can eat into mass agriculture and mass industrialization. You have global trade like never before. You have industrialization like never before. And all of that is simulated within the game. That's the entire point, right? Where you have, the material conditions of the world based on what jobs people have and what things they do and make and eat and everything else. And that informs your politics, the makeup of your country, and the entirety of the gameplay. And, in this oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just saying, yeah, that's pretty good explanation why.
Yeah, and the reason why is basically if you're exploring that industrial revolution, but it also has magic, imagine how much that changes things. Because again, we already have, in the real life industrial revolution, everything from, the things people eat to the way they live to the way they think. We have communism, socialism, liberalism, republics, democracies. We have, nation states and incredibly, we start having, the Soviet Union and insane revolutions like no one's ever seen. But imagine those revolutionaries when they have the power of magic on their side, standardized industrial magic. With what we're doing with the artificery system, which is just baked into the production methods of the game, along with, what we're trying to do with traditional magic, Adventurers Wanted, all these other systems, we're trying to show how the Industrial Revolution goes even harder, basically. With the dual revolutions of industry and magic, with Steer and oil and coal and everything else, we get to explore what it looks like when you have magic in the Industrial Revolution. Like, what things would actually help the production process? Would it be useful to have enchantments in this particular way? What could they do? And also, what consequences that has for society?
Okay, so explain then how Artificery has changed from, say, late game EU4 with obviously the new Artificer system that I love, but obviously that wouldn't really translate well into Victoria 3 as, I mean, it's
right,
different systems entirely. So how does Artificery, being such a huge part of the Victoria 3 mod, how does that take effect?
So in the Victoria 3 era, artificery is just part of the economy, right? This is part of the age where everything's standardized and everything changes. So the way that we've brought it in is that artificery is just part of your production methods. There's ways to enchant things where, here, let me bring up some examples. For example, when you're in the late game, and you've gotten a lot of spirit energy and artificery gadgets and things like that, instead of just deforesting logging camps and things like that, you can start using the magic inherent in these goods to regrow old growth forests. When you are doing textile mills and you're trying to create clothing and all of this kind of stuff, you can code transmutation magic into the fabric itself, where it'll increase your production. It'll do it all for you. We're creating things where, you have self-cleaning porcelain, where fabrication spells create tools. We have mithril that is used to make supports in exoskeletons. That's just part of these production methods. In fertilizer, you can use essence of decay and enchant it in to make sure that everything breaks down easier. In explosive factories, you can use elemental gunpowder to, produce more and better. This will go insane in the military system and all of that, but every single building now has more ways to interact with a magical industrial economy. And so we've created a few new goods, a few new ways of getting them, and we've integrated it all together as much as we can. And this is a continuing process, but what we're doing is making everything more impactful by showing what magic can do.
Okay. So magic is still definitely a part of the game as well. You're going to be interacting with magic, not just with regards to artificery, but there is still remnants of magic? Okay.
Because the mages haven't just gone away. We have a traditional magic system that's much like the institutions in normal Victoria 3, where, you have this capacity called magical expertise or magical capacity. And you build it by having mage towers, by having mages work in your economy, by doing all of these things. And the more you have it, the more you're able to cast nationwide spells, which instead of in the old era, where magic was just a thing done by incredibly powerful people on their own, in the modern age, it is about networks of mages, about having infrastructure of mage towers and things like that all over your country. And if you have that enough, you can do incredible things. You can enchant diplomats, you can have, undead laborers, you can do all of these things, but it's never going to scale quite as well as artificery. Because
Right.
this is not the era, it doesn't matter how great your magical infrastructure is, how many mages you have going about and all of that, because you can only have so many mages. Not everyone can do it. And on the other hand, with artificery, it can change everything in the entire world. It can be baked into every part of your industries, every part of life, all that kind of stuff. And so you have this tension where, because mages are a pop in this game, we have created
Okay.
a mage profession, and they are often aristocrats, they're often owners. They'll provide you with this magical expertise and infrastructure. But as you industrialize, you'll have a real question to ask, which is that both the artificers and the mages want Dame's Tier. They both want relics. They both want all of the things that make magic work.
Right.
And if you're controlled by mages, if you're a really big aristocrat nation or something like that, they're going to want to dominate all of it. If you want to keep up your spells and all of that, especially because it'll be harder as you get more and more population, everything will become more expensive. And
Okay.
if you do that, then you're losing, there's so much opportunity cost because you're not investing into your industry, into everything else. You can see in the game as you lose mage population, industrialize, how that's going to change your economy, just like it does in normal Victoria 3, but in an accelerated and more engaging way. Because now you are dealing with not just normal industry, but also the fundamental properties of magic itself.
And all right. So you mentioned the mages would be a pop type there. Um, I was under the impression, maybe falsely, that the population system would be used maybe as a way to describe different races within Anbennar. Like gnomes
Mhm.
would be a different pop to humans, to a different pop to half
Yeah.
orcs, etc. That's still the case as well.
Absolutely. We are experimenting with ways to make this more nuanced because Victoria 3 has a more nuanced understanding of culture than EU4 does. It's able to simulate it on a smaller level. So we're trying to figure out, how is the relationship between species and culture treated in this era? Where does monstrousness come into it? Where does religion come into it? We're not entirely sure on how it's going to end up looking. But yes, basically, there will be a way of both showing what species a population is and its religion and its culture, etc.
Okay. Um, so what would be the say in Victoria? I'm more familiar with Victoria 2, admittedly, but I have played quite a bit of Victoria 3 as well. And generally, people were often directed towards playing like a Prussia, because then you get the whole experience of uniting into a Germany, having a strong nation and fighting wars and having fun there. What would be like the standout nations that when Victoria 3 and Anbennar is released that you would be like, oh, you should totally play this nation. They have this really cool mechanic that lets them do this, 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 and this. Like, what are the nations you'd point out as like being that kind of gameplay?
So right now we're mostly focusing on the base systems before we start getting individual content, but I know what's planned for a lot of them. And with that in mind, I really think that the Jad, like we were talking about, is going to have some crazy diplomatic gameplay. The Gnomish hierarchy is going to have things going on with Mechanim and and kobolds and colonization and a rivalry with the Triarchy and Insia and so many other things. The Northern League has taken over a lot of Garudia, but is still dealing with the cultural consequences of it, and so has to balance internal interests and ethnic conflicts and all of these other things. Laurent is trying to keep control of this massive colonial empire. Let's see who else. I'm really excited for the Triarchy. I think we can do really cool things with them. Really, oh god, there's so many options. Really, I'm really excited for Fate 10. I'm excited for Catarata. I'm the wrong person to ask because I'm excited about all of them.
I
They're all of
can
the great
tell.
powers. I know it's gonna be great. Oh, and of course, Anbennar. I can keep saying countries forever. I'm sorry,
just
but
straight up listing them all.
yeah, I could just go through every single one of them. But really, I do think that those main great powers are going to have very dynamic gameplay.
Okay.
And also, just looking in chat for a second, interestingly, our mod is actually very fast right now. I was comparing it to Victoria 3, like the vanilla one, and we go monumentally quicker. I think it's because we have taken out most of the vanilla, like country content, which a lot of it is coded relatively inefficiently or is just not going to be needed for us.
Wait,
But right now, I'm sorry?
Victoria 3 has country content?
Yes, it
Sorry,
actually
sorry,
does,
no,
believe
sorry.
it or not.
I have digs at Victoria 3. It's mandatory. Sorry, I apologize.
But yes, it actually, right now, the game does run very smoothly, which we're also happy about.
That's interesting. Okay. You mentioned the Triarchy, and you
Yes.
mentioned it multiple times, and I have no idea who the Triarchy is. I feel like it might be a tag that I
Haha.
should know, but it isn't. Because for me, that area is usually like owned by the oh, there's a gnomish adventurer that goes down there.
Mhm.
Um, and they're generally the ones, if I don't interfere, they're the ones who win. So who are the Triarchy? What's their deal?
The Triarchy is one of my favorite nations in the entire game, in EU4 and Victoria 3. They don't have a mission tree yet in EU4, though God do I hope I get to work on it eventually. But basically, you've seen those gnomes go down there. Have you also seen the goblins and the kobolds go down there?
Yeah, but they die often.
Yes,
So
but
I
the
mean,
thing is, these three artificer cities that all settle for
ah,
off, they come from different situations. One of them in canon is, like escaping the hierarchy and trying to fight against its centralizing policies. The hierarchy tries to, take control over all of artificery.
right.
The kobolds are, escaping both the hierarchy and the kobolds who are still alive. They're caught between two worlds where, they're embracing the thought and artificery, which means the old kobolds are rejecting them, but also they're kobolds, so the hierarchy is rejecting them. The goblins come from the Reach up near Gawed, where they have been, expelled out of the Serpent Spine, expelled out of Ascan. They are migrants trying to make a world of their own, and they also end up embracing artificery and going to the new world. In these cities, we're figuring out the exact lore about how they work together and how they don't, but they eventually confederate together into this triarchy. It is a co-equal partnership with a very special role for the Gomo. Because do you know much about the Gomo?
Yes, I very much enjoy that system in EU4. It's always exciting when
Yes,
I realize that I'm in control of one of their cities and I can get this
exactly.
awesome event chain. I love the event chains for it.
But the fun thing about it is that Gomo port, one of the three adventurers that forms a triarchy, is the Gomo.
Okay.
Which means that if you're going to be playing the Triarchy, our ideas for the content for it is that you'll also be playing the Gomo. The Gomo becomes a partner within this country, so you're going to be able to, if we get it right, manage the artificery of the entire world in a way.
Oh, that is pretty cool.
All of those different branches, all of those different things, as the world starts gaining artificery, you're always there, influencing them, changing things, and all of that. And all of this is preliminary right now. This is mostly lore more than anything else. But to have this co-equal partnership of kobolds and gnomes and goblins who are all working in their different forms of artificery, who have these conflicts but come together, and are also at the head of this like international organization that is like changing the entire world, both in good ways and bad. The Gomo is partially responsible for the rending in LS, but
Mhm.
they're also responsible for like mass adoption of artificery throughout the world. They've got so much going on, and it's all centered on this tiny little country in Alen Tier that has so much potential.
So it seems like you're using the Victoria 3 systems and then really filling in the gaping holes that Victoria 3 has in regards to like the lack of content with content that I really like with Anbennar. Like that seems
In a way.
I hate that you're making me want to reinstall Victoria 3. I hate
Let me
that you're
up you on
making me
it.
want to reinstall it. That's
Let me make it better. Okay, with the Triarchy specifically, because we're talking about them. Now, I'm about to tell you something that we're not actually officially developing, but it's my personal plans for it. You know how the new Victoria 3 DLC is coming out soon?
yes.
And it's all about, foreign investment and all that kind of stuff. We don't know how moddable it's going to be yet, but if you can make it so that countries can, like, invest in other ones without needing to have, like, like control over their economy, blah, 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 If the Triarchy could like control little pieces of artificery all throughout the world, if you could use the Victoria 3 mechanics in a way that the EU4 never could, because you can simulate each little building, each little piece of ownership, who owns what, you could have wealth and artificery from all over the world go into the Triarchy.
That would be pretty cool. That would,
It
yeah,
would.
yeah. Okay, all right, all right. I
We've
see where
also
you're
got,
going with this.
yeah, okay, yeah. We've
Uh,
also got like, oh, sorry.
no, feel free.
With the Victoria 3 Adventures Wanted system. I believe you're talking to River Doge about the EU4 new Adventure system the other day, right?
Yeah, we were.
We've got our own plans for it, and part of these are already implemented. Where all throughout the world, these random buildings can spawn that are Adventures Wanted, right? But
Okay.
instead of it just being like, oh, we have a little province modifier, they all are buildings. They have different chances for spawning and all of that. What that means is you can simulate adventurers as people. And
Okay.
this gives so many fun things we can do. Because adventurers are a problem, right? They're necessary, but they're a problem. All throughout the world, for all of Halan's history, there have been, evil liches, extraplanar breaches, all of the things that we love in fantasy. And nation states can't always handle these problems. So you have to hire these guys that are basically murder hobos. They become incredibly powerful. They become, crazy high-level mages and fighters and paladins and all of this. And once the threat ends, I mean, if you ever played a D&D game, you know that adventurers go crazy when it's the late game. They go do a coup on the government. They go, cause problems elsewhere. They're complete buckets of chaos.
You'll kill a
And
god
simulate
here and
it,
there
yes.
as well, why not?
Exactly. And our goal is basically to simulate this. Because this is an era where, like, adventurers, you can have them in their buildings and all of that. And as time goes on, your military technology advances. So they go from being like, oh, we're traditional parties, into like, okay, we're using some modern firepower. We're using small arms and ammunition and things like that. Once you get into late game, these are like private BlackRock style armies. They're using modern technology, radios, crazy artificery and all of that. And they are a horrifying force to deal with.
Okay.
Because you need them. There are all of these threats going on, and the adventurers have to be the ones to deal with it. Because the adventurers are great at looting, they're great at destroying all of these things, but as you get these powerful ways of dealing with these threats, you also grow your power as a state. And eventually, what we want to be able to happen is that you can nationalize the adventurers and send the army in instead.
Okay. Yeah, that
It
would be pretty dangerous if you're sending level 20 wizards and such at your enemies. I can see that happening.
Exactly. Because you nationalize them, you send in the army to deal with these threats. The army, they make the buildings less profitable, but they clear quicker because you have a little progress bar on all of them. But also, more importantly, this changes what populations are employed. Because when the threats spawn, the adventurers get rich off of them. But then when they complete the quest, these adventurers, rich and powerful and politically engaged, are all unemployed. And they're ready to be radicals. So you have this incentive over the game to disempower the adventurers, to, keep them weak, to keep it so that you don't need them, to try to bring in the army instead. And you have this societal back and forth. We also want it so that, the adventurers can entrench themselves into your government. Maybe there'll be a law or something like it where you can't nationalize them, or where, they're pushing back against you, or interest groups in certain countries may be like made up of adventurers at the top of the chain. Because we've seen in Anbennar how some nations were founded by adventurers, how they have done so many things. And so you get this cool back and forth of like, what are the consequences of adventurers on the world, and how do modern nation states deal with that?
Okay.
Eventually, there's a couple more things I could go into. I'd love to talk about like the production methods, because we have crazy things like, if you have like a dungeon or something, it's not simply about, okay, we have these adventures doing crazy things. It's also like, okay, we're simulating everything in Victoria 3. Who are the adventurers like buying their guns from? Who's feeding them? Who's doing all of that? So we have this like civilian infrastructure production method group that's like, shopkeep suppliers and dungeon department stores, where by the end of the game, like, there's entire economies being set up near the dungeons, selling luxury clothes and groceries and keeping your adventurers healthy. At the same time, you're like using mining explosives to break into the dens of liches and things like that. You're bringing in heavy artillery to deal with extraplanar attacks. You are like using the police of your country, which is then gated by what police laws you have, to like investigate hidden cults of eldritch monsters or hag dens or thieves guilds. You have all of these fun little interactions with the Victoria 3 mechanics and how it works and the production method groups and all of that. What it all ends up meaning at the end is that as the spawn rates for the adventurer buildings start going down, as you have intense and incredible technology that can clear these buildings quicker, as you start nationalizing them and taking away adventurer pops, what this ends up meaning is that this is the age where adventuring dies.
That's sad.
It
But,
is, but it's also, this is the age where traditional mages no longer become relevant in dominating the world. This is the age where adventurers go from these, world-saving problems with private armies that slowly just get phased out of existence. This is the era where magic becomes so much more important as you unlock the fundamental qualities of it. You discover how to remake precursor steel and alter the fundamental properties of magic itself. You see all of these developments and all of these changes, and this is all in addition to the normal industrial revolution of our world. And that's why I love it.
I can definitely see why. Like, there's all of that does sound like very obviously flavorful and all things that I would love to interact with. And look, if you can get it so that I enjoy playing Victoria 3, like I will give it a shot for sure. But it's like I've got Father Loris in chat saying all of it sounds really nice. But then interacting with it within the framework of something that is less than enjoyable for us. If you can patch over the bits that we dislike, then that is exciting for me as well.
Absolutely, and that is the goal. We first of all, I am very excited for the new DLC. Honestly, I think they are going in a very good direction. Like most Paradox games, the original start is always going to be a little rocky, but the things they're doing and adding are addressing a lot of the community concerns. But even more than that, like I look at EU4 and then I look at Anbennar EU4. And Anbennar EU4 does things that I can't play vanilla EU4 anymore. I'm going to be honest. The stuff that Anbennar does is so incredible and world-changing, pushing that game to its absolute limit and then past that limit. And I want our Victoria 3 mod to do the exact same thing. I want it to be an overhaul, and it already is an overhaul. There's already people. The mod is very unfinished right now, and yet we already have some playtesters being like, "Oh, I just really love how, like, when you're going whaling, you can also set them to be monster hunting and get, like, magical regents and oil from these crazy magical boats that you're doing, like you're playing Dishonored or something. Or, like, just all these little bits and pieces, gem mines that give regents, adventurers where you're able to do these things. From the very small pieces we've been able to assemble already, we're already getting people kind of hooked. And I really think this is only going to get better.
All right. Well, I think that's as good a sales pitch as I think it's possible to make. Maybe Paradox needs to hire you to do sales pitches for Victoria 3 in general. But I will have to leave it on that note then. Do you want to say any final words to encourage people to try Victoria 3 Anbennar when it is out? Is there a planned release for it as well?
We're slowly working on it. There is no release date yet, but we are getting closer than you might think. But if I was going to say any last thing, okay, it'll take just a little bit of time. But when I first got into this mod, the thing that initially captured me was this conflict between magic and artificery. Because they're not fundamental opposites. They're not things that have to be in tension. Because they're using the same force, right? They're both magic. But the real question is about society. It's about, what does a mage do and look like? What do they want? What does an artificer do and look like? What are they after? And being able to fully simulate this conflict, this changing world, this industrial revolution plus, that to me is one of the most interesting things a piece of media can do. And I am really trying to do it here. And we are trying to really do it here.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Lex, for coming and chatting to me about Anbennar in Victoria 3. It's been a pleasure. I didn't think
Absolutely,
I
me
would
too.
enjoy talking about Victoria 3 quite as much as I did. So thank you for
We'll
that, I
get
guess.
ya.
We'll see.
We'll see.
All right, thank you very much, and I will
Thank you.
hope you the best of luck in next week's Dev Clash.
Have a nice day. You have a
too.
great night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, that was Lex talking about Victoria 3.